it's not a simple topic. This term intelligence is quite broad. When we start studying this term, we face the challenges in the definition of the word intelligence. What is intelligence as a form of organization, as a form of activity and structure, and the scientific discipline that is not very much studied in Brazil. So we have this discussion on this debate at this panel of artificial intelligence as a way not to replace but to add to human intelligence with its capacity of perception and cognition, as the FGV president said, a cognition that we understand that is not existing yet. This word intelligence convey this perception that we have a lot to study and regulate in Brazil, not only concerning the intelligence activity, but also its use, especially artificial intelligence, in order to protect Brazilian society with the use of the classic intelligence, the state intelligence, or with the use of the artificial intelligence tool to execute this task. That is not part of the Brazilian culture up until now, this use with the state intelligence. Something that has been soothing me concerning the discussion on intelligence in Brazil, the use of artificial intelligence, is that we were able to see the presentation of Bill 2338/23 by the Rodrigo Pacheco, the President of the Senate. That is a joint bill of law that is bringing several concepts, definitions, and propositions on the use of the tool. And what is soothing me concerning this bill of law is not the text itself, because we know it's going to be debated, but the way as it was written. It was written first calling society to participate, and several experts in this multidisciplinary panel had the opportunity to provide their opinion on the regulation of artificial intelligence in Brazil. So some people might say that any type of regulation concerning the internet is harmful. I believe that this thought is overcome today. All tools, all weapons have powers to be well used or badly used. And it's not different with the internet. We must regulate it clearly in a transparent way, respecting internet's freedom, but in such a way that we can punish those who are using it in a harmful way. The issue of artificial intelligence in Brazil, what concerns us specifically, is not only this discussion concerning its use and the use of disinformation as a way of changing opinions of a great group of people. What concerns me concerning artificial intelligence is something deeper. An American author called Thomas L. Friedman, in a book called Thank You for the Delay, and it's a very interesting book, he talks about this history of the internet, and he applies the Moore law. He says that we left this curve of growth in terms of processing and storing data, and we entered this new curve, a hyperbole, that is showing us that we don't even have the ability to understand where artificial intelligence or computational ability is going to take us. Probably we cannot even imagine what this processing ability will enable us in this lifetime. Things that were unimaginable in the past are now possible. We don't even have the ability to know that this is possible. And as President Eva said, with this drastic reduction of cost in terms of processing and storage capacity, this ability applied with the development of artificial intelligence bring a very concerning scenario. It's not only changing a speech, a face, a picture, and replacing someone in a picture or changing the thought of a small group. What concerns me is the use of this artificial intelligence in a very subtle way so that we can effectively change people's mindset. People want, using the example concerning political campaigns, but we have to open our minds. It's not only a matter of political specific issue, but we have issues of the rule of law, of sovereignty, and so on, and the things that could be altered using the mindset of people. I don't have to wait for the electoral period to change people's mindset. I could start today. So when I talk about this mindset shift, I'm not bringing ready-made thoughts. What is concerning me are the small pills that could be put into a person's head so that they start thinking in a particular way with a great conviction that that new way of thinking is the right one. And worse than that, it is democratic. So there are various techniques for that. And and what is artificial intelligence but capturing external data and also trying to think as a human person? So we've always been behind. I've been fighting crime for a long time, and I've always given a lot of attention to prevention and then not only the repression, but we're always behind trying to catch the criminals and those people who use technology in a harmful way. There's no doubt that artificial intelligence will be used in a harmful way. The problem is that it could be used in a way that could make it very hard to prevent this kind of crime or harmful use. Of course, we are going to have to use artificial intelligence to fight that. And I thought it was very interesting what the secretary just said, that the state is thinking about this problem that is crucial to me, which is education. Brad Smith, the president of Microsoft, he wrote a book called Weapons and Tools. And when he talks about, for 3 chapters about the artificial intelligence, he says that in the United States, a person can enter West Point to become a colonel, a soldier, a colonel, or general, and leave that place without a single ethics course.
A mesma coisa para as pessoas que se
The
formam.
same thing goes for people who graduate from the computer sciences schools. And in Brazil, where do we teach ethics? What schools teach ethics nowadays? The issue of the use of artificial intelligence goes through a philosophical discussion. There are countless techniques that are used in our daily activities to unauthorize or empower people through the use of techniques that have to do with critical thinking. If we don't teach several techniques like formal fallacy, black and white thinking, several, I could mention 10, but this has to do with the way that we build our school of thought. If we don't teach our children, adolescents, university students, our professors and students in the universities of development, computer science, to have ethics, and all the other students and all the other people, all the directors, especially of the public sectors that are part of this multidisciplinary groups that will not only make the laws, but participate in the management and the supervision of the systems of artificial intelligence. If we don't teach these people to think in a critical way, they're not going to be able to detect when their thought is being changed or when someone is trying to change the way of thinking, the way that they think. And we're also going to have to face discussions. We're going to have to face people that are not prepared to develop those systems. My concern is a little bit deeper because based on the experience that we have, we are always behind. And good people, they usually think that the people that use things for the evil, they have limits. The ethical values, the cognitive values of these people are completely different from people who are Democrats, people who are good, people who want to build good things for humankind. We have to lose this naivety and know that we have to use the same weapons and tools against these people who are going to try to use artificial intelligence for evil, for anti-democratic issues. And further ahead, I think throughout the debate, as it was requested, we have propositions and we can talk about a few experiences that are being well utilized. That are still incipient in the Brazilian system of public security and intelligence. We can have a good use for this technology for the good of the Brazilian state and the democracy in Brazil. Thank you, Alessandro Moretti. Of course, we're going to debate this topic again later, but now I would like to pass the floor to Nicole Brioni. She is the Superintendent of Digital Communication and Social Media and IPC. She is an expert in political marketing. She was a reporter, press assistant, and coordinator of state, presidential, and municipal campaigns from 2017 to 2021, she coordinated the social media of the current president, and that included the period that Lula spent in jail, the elections of 2018, and the pandemic. She was also available for streamlining the digital communication of Lula while he was in prison. Thank you very much, Nicole. Hello, good afternoon, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to speak more freely, but I took notes of a few things in the morning, and I was very satisfied with the debate from the morning because I came with more concerns than answers. I think in this kind of debate, it's better if we come with more concerns. And I'm very happy that we are bringing to the European Union to this debate, which is the avant-garde in data protection in the world. One of the first discussions that we had on data protection with President Lula, one of the first contacts that he had with this topic was during a visitation to Spain. We know that Germany and Spain are very concerned about this, and the technology producers are less concerned about this because they are more profit-oriented. So the data protection is more in the avant-garde in the European Union. So I would like to thank FGV for the initiative and this partnership that we are starting now with EBC that Jean presented in the morning. This whole framework that we had this year in terms of restructuring, I hope that we can produce many things with you from here on. I wrote down a few things here. While we speak here, many new tools and applications are being created by millions of users. The speed of data in the country like Brazil, with the internet consumption that we have and with the relationship with the internet that we have, is something impressive indeed. In the morning, we saw more apprehensive speakers, but also more optimistic speeches like Alexandre was reminding us of Clarice on the use of these tools. We see the optimization of the data use and some revolution in processes. We have the digitalization of the universal healthcare system, SUS. It's an initiative by Marcela Haddad from the Ministry of Health, and it could cause a revolution in the public system with the dimension that SUS has here in Brazil. As Clarice said in the morning, there's a huge volume of data that the Attorney General Office processes, which is an innovative solution. Artificial intelligence can optimize the bureaucratic efficiency of the state. This is something very relevant. But the biggest dilemma, as Alexandre mentioned here, when he said, when he mentioned the ethical background of our universities. In my journalism course, I had an ethics discipline, and in medicine, you have an ethics discipline, and you have some limits. I don't believe that in computer science, you have an ethics discipline. In medicine, for example, you have codes with bioethics. You preserve the principle of human dignity. This is something that is a worldwide fact. You have topics like cloning, for example, that has to do with bioethics. In medicine, the sky is not the limit, but in artificial intelligence today, the sky is the limit. And you have a volume of data. I mentioned here Brazil and the relationship with Brazilians and the internet. When we start the discussion this afternoon, tomorrow, this discussion is a different one because we have a limit of the machine, but we also have to deal with training this machine. We are doing this human training of this machine all the time. Every new platform that appears, every facility, every app, every tool is being fed with data. In the morning, Leila mentioned an initiative of the newspapers, of the editorial groups, of banning the entrance of the machine and their servers to capture data. But we have this human training. It is very difficult to have a total prohibition. Every day, ChatGPT and OpenAI becomes more intelligent. It becomes more trained. So in Brazil, this has a greater proportion because we are feeding this machine with the know-how in each person's head. This is a very difficult discussion in Brazil because this country did not yet recover from the rupture with truth. We are losing the basic criteria of distinction from what is real. Here, it's very difficult for a lie to have similarity with the truth. I think João was going to mention this further ahead. We have an initiative from the government that brings us some tranquility, but it's something very urgent. Here we have trouble with loss of credibility from the press. That is why it's very important for media and democracy to be with us in this partnership, because I think this is the beginning. At the end of this debate, we're going to point out certain directions and public policies to have this kind of minimum control when we talk about artificial intelligence. As I said, the sky is the limit, and we cannot guarantee, since we have a regulation in terms of bioethics and cloning, that everybody is going to adapt to this. But if we have regulation, we have punishment, we have a law, we have supervision and overlooking, and we can give some control to this. We're starting with Amaro, Ricardo, and Marco, a process through EBC of listening to the digital environment. We used to call it monitoring, and now we are calling it listening. We want to hear what the Brazilian population has been saying about the digital environment. This is a partnership that is predicted to the beginning of the year of 2024. What we understood as monitoring of the digital environment already changed. Now, when you access open platforms that are easier to monitor, like Twitter, for example, if you are a human tool, if you do a human reading, you can already differentiate that some speeches are robotic. But if you use a tool to monitor this discussion, today the volume of comments made by bots via artificial intelligence is huge. And this ends up affecting the perception of control bodies that are induced to think that the society is saying something, but the society is saying something else entirely different. So this is a problem that affects the market, it affects market research, it simulates an artificial debate. These are artificial outcomes. So we have been able to develop this partnership now and evolve with the communication school of FGV to come up with a product that can mine this data and be sure of what is in fact real, for us to be able to know what are the main discussions in the Brazilian society. Juan Moretti mentioned that the artificial intelligence is not only used during the electoral period. We are saying that during the pandemic, there were thousands of people dying. I had two uncles who died because they did not get vaccinated. People were induced to thinking the opposite, that the vaccine was not good, that the vaccine did not protect them, that it could give them cancer or AIDS. That was a problem that affected the whole population. It was not an electoral period. It was a culture of ideological dispute or narrative dispute provoked by polarization that led us to be in constant information war. So I would like to salute this initiative here and try to modulate more and more this listening to the society to understand where our bottlenecks are, to understand where we have to act as a government and how the government can act as a public policy, with a public policy of education, media education in specific niches. For example, we had the issue of violence in the schools. I was asking Amado in the morning if we had a monitoring at Discord. I believe that someone does. In Discord, we had a series of combinations for the mass shooters to happen in the Brazilian schools. Those were gamer forums, and the mass shootings were being discussed there. And maybe a tool of artificial intelligence could have helped us with this hearing. Of course, you have to involve the human figure to analyze this data and read the data. This is the work that EBC has been doing for the future. We have thought a lot about the superintendents of digital communication and creating a unit to study artificial intelligence. IBC, differently than the companies in general, EBC does not aim for profit. EBC is not a company that is going to accept being remunerated by the platforms, which is a campaign of the companies remunerating those that make journalism and that analyze the formal information, but EBC wants to democratize information because we are a public information company. We are serving the population, we are providing services, and we want to contribute to this debate. I hope this is the beginning of something very big that involves society, and I hope that we can collaborate with what is being built by Pacheco, by the Federal Senate, in terms of regulation. Thank you so much. Thank you, Nicole. I'm going to pass the floor now to João Brante. João, please let me know if you have to leave. João has a conflict of agendas. He is the Secretary of Digital Policies at SECOM. He is a doctor in policies by the University of São Paulo, and he has a master at the London School of Economics. He is the director of the Institute Culture and Democracy as well. I have two corrections in my biography. This biography is from before I entered the government. I am a secretary of digital policies only. I'm no longer a director of the Disinformation project, but I bring this project with me in my heart because I have had many experiences in this project that I bring to this day. I am a director in the School of Media and Information. I have collaborated in some projects of the MBA, but I'm participating in the opening of the course in São Paulo as well. Thank you very much for the invitation. I started with these corrections, but I would like to resume by thanking FGV for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. And I think it's worth saying that the Secretariat of Digital Policies is a new one created to face the challenges in the intersection between the informational environment and the digital environment. We're facing disinformation, the hate speech, all of these topics with the specific locus in the government, which did not happen before. This transition process pointed towards the necessity of creating this secretariat. This public sphere changed in the last 10 years, and that generated impacts for the democracy. And we needed to act as a government. So what could we do? We had a problem. It is probably a consensus in this room, but not in the society. There are people that say that we don't have a problem, that disinformation is not that big, or it does not have such an impact in democracy. We assess that it is. Minister Pimenta has mentioned this systematically as a key issue for SECOM, because disinformation affects the right that society has to be well informed for decision making. And this right is the collective dimension of the right to expression. Nowadays, UN has called the integrity of information. There is now an open discussion of a code of conduct for the digital platforms to protect the integrity of information, understanding integrity of information as consistency, precision of information. So we're talking about a positive agenda regarding fighting against disinformation and hate speech. So it is the defense of having at the availability of the society reliable sources of information to make political decisions.
Do sistema interamericano de direitos humanos.
The Inter-American System of Human Rights support that. The consultative opinion number 1 from 85 talks about this debate on freedom of expression, and it's been reaffirmed by the Inter-American Court of Rights and also in the UN system. The rapporteur on freedom of expression said that the disinformation is affecting the freedom of opinion of people, because if the environment where you extract the information that you're using to form your opinion is contaminated, that would affect your freedom of opinion. So this premise that disinformation is affecting democracy is not so obvious, but it's well understood, and I believe we'd have a consensus here in this room. And artificial intelligence will enhance the risks of disinformation. I think there are two elements. I've been following up the debate with international speakers, and everyone is trying to read what's happening from the technical standpoint in terms of possibilities and impacts. But I would say that we have a problem that the cost is much cheaper. So this information is much easier to spread than journalistic information. So it enables several processes on data treatment and production of journalistic uh, information, but it's enabling this information much more. So it's accelerating the disadvantage much more than the advantage. So this is a problem. And the second issue is that depending on where we go, and I believe that Alessandro is pointing to this concern, that we only see the tip of the iceberg in terms of transformation. We are not seeing the process and where it could go. It's changing our perception not only about what is fake, but also about what is true. So this reading of reality in this environment where the digital mediation is permanently happening, this is raising concerning our reading of reality. I'm going to tell a story. On Friday, I was with my daughter. She's 9, and she wanted to show me a book that she was writing with her colleagues. We're writing that, but we go to Canva, and it's Canva Pro, not the one you have. And then we write down the request to get an illustration. So she puts a prompt and receives an illustration. And the illustrations are wonderful. And what about this one? That one was hard because we had to ask for 3 times because the dragon didn't have the bubbles the way we wanted to. So my daughter, who is 9, was writing a book with her 2 colleagues using artificial intelligence. And I told her, let's subscribe to Canva Pro to understand how it works. So now we are in the prehistory of artificial intelligence, the generative one, and we are seeing very meaningful change. So if this is true, this is the trend that I've been observing in international debates. We have to improve what we understand as a set of strategies that we have to face disinformation. So all the effort of check agencies, and Lupa is an example. First, they only checked facts, but they have a broader work in terms of facing disinformation. They are concerned with the sustainability of journalism and so on. So ECD works with 3 pillars of response. One that is concerning improving the quality of informational environment. It has to do with strengthening the professional journalism with a strong EBC, with private broadcasts which are strong, a set of efforts. But when we talk about quality, we are not only talking about the ability of existing and subsisting, but also talking about the quality of the delivery to society. And we must strengthen the society's resilience, and that has to do with fact checking and a set of actions that is reinforcing social resilience against disinformation. And we have a 3rd chapter on public governance and regulation. We are working in these 3 fronts as the Brazilian government. Just an overview. First, we believe that the regulation, and I reinforce the discourse brought by Alexandre de Moraes, we believe that the bill of law, from the contributions from the beginning of the year that provided much more strength to it, it's an important bill to be voted. It's trying to regulate the platform responsibility as a subsidiary responsibility in the cases of paid content. And they also have to do with illegal contents that must be used in a preemptive way as legal by social media with no surveillance. We're balancing rights. So it's bringing a dimension that is very close to the ASA in Europe of the systemic risk evaluation and mitigation measures for systemic risk. So I must understand that the situation that I'm going to see within a year must be better than what we have today. So they need to commit and respond to someone, a democratic regulator, an autonomous agency that could enhance right protection. So this effort is ongoing. The government has been dialoguing with companies and stakeholders to get a better project so that it can be approved. The second point is journalism sustainability. In the same view of law, we had important measures. We believe that the measures are not enough because they do not bring in itself an anti-concentration mechanism. So we've been working in this dialogue with some sectors in order to strengthen uh, a public background, so to speak. But this is not public yet. But it's interesting for the government that not only we will have this direct negotiation with the company, but also a public program to reinforce journalism and public interest. And we've been working with that, and we're going to bring a proposal for public debate. We have education on media, and we have this ordinance that we issued with the Ministry of Education and Culture. We have 403 activities in 24 states in the Federation that right now is establishing this constant dialogue with the Ministry of Education and Culture so that the media education will enter the classroom, forming professors and creating educational materials and reinforcing civil societies or society organizations that are helping us. You have Lupa, Redes Cordiais, Palavra Aberta, several initiatives. SaferNet from Bahia. They are producing important materials that must be harnessed in this process of strengthening the media education initiatives. From the standpoint of the government, we also have this understanding that we must work with our own instruments, what we have to make available in this fight against disinformation. The attorney's office has created tools, the Ministry of Justice as well. When we see criminal evidence or hints, we should investigate. And there's a commitment concerning public agents when there's the engagement of public agents, as in the case of vaccines. And exactly because we know that we have distributed knowledge in the government, we have created this committee to deal with the cases of vaccines. It was launched at the end of October. It's been organizing in this long-term strategy so that we can face a real problem that is the low vaccine coverage. And we're not talking about COVID only. We're talking about measles and other diseases, polio. We saw some cases being registered in Peru. So it's a public issue, a key public issue. And there's an effort of testing this pilot that would enable us to have a multi-faced strategy using intelligence that is not artificial intelligence or state intelligence, but it's understanding to give the best responses in different moments. And it encompasses monitoring in the sense of understanding how anti-vaccine discourses are circulating around Brazil, with investigation, accountability, and training of health public agents. So this is a priority of Minister Anísia and also Minister Pimenta, so that this strategy can be passed. So this is adding to what society is doing, facing disinformation. And last, I believe that we have to say what we need to do concerning the regulation on artificial intelligence. The bill in the Senate has been discussed with the government. We are going to have a third meeting on Friday to discuss the general stance of the government with several areas involved. And it's in a good pathway because it's evaluating risk as a key element, a founding principle. But each area has a different view, and the fact that we have different views also means that this topic of our artificial intelligence is affecting those who are thinking about digital government, fostering technology, productivity, and also employability and disinformation. It's not a single angle. There are many perspectives, and there's this great effort to harmonize views. But we have three key elements that I'd like to highlight. I know that I'm out of time now, but the first one is that we need to have elements of transparency and traceability of what artificial intelligence was used. So the watermarks, the provenance measures. I'm mentioning the terms in English because this debate is more consistent abroad, but we are talking about this ability to know that this object, this piece of information was created with artificial intelligence. Of course, the more impact that image or speech has, the difference and the difference of being created with artificial intelligence, if it's impacting more or less, the more important for transparency. So if I have an image, if I'm a candidate and this image is putting me in a situation that it will create a negative impact for the voter, of course I must know that that image was created by AI. The second thing is to understand, and this is not in the current project, in the current bill, that this dimension of disinformation must be enhanced and the information integrity must be protected. So that means that the understanding that the large-scale disseminators, such as digital platforms, they need to be understood as high-risk systems. We are talking about a system where the risk to democracy is huge, and some measures to follow up and mitigate must be taken, and this is not in the bill today. And the third and last topic is somehow to discuss the accountability. I'm talking about accountability in its formal sense. There's this disagreement with the Justice Alexandre de Moraes. The way as we present that the platforms are being treated as media companies for any content, we are going to be silencing the problem. This is problematic for the freedom of expression. If we maintain the current logic when they are not responsible for anything, you have this reverse incentive. So they are the only ones who are able to understand what's happening, and they wait for this judicial order. So you only deal with the urgent matters. You're not diminishing the problems generated. You only deal with that fire that is emerging, and that's all. So we must have a good balance on accountability. We understand this subsidiary accountability for paid content is a good balance between two models, is generating the proper incentive, and if the AI framework is going to talk about the informational environment, that seems to be the right way. I'm sorry that I took longer, and I hope I didn't I didn't disrupt the conversation, but we could explore this topic on the debate. Thank you. Thank you, João. Before I give the floor to the next panel member, I'd like to comment what you just said, that Lupa was born as a fact-checking agency, and it's part of this ecosystem that we are trying to expand our work to face disinformation in different fronts. We know that disinformation became more sophisticated, so the way as we fight that must be sophisticated. So Lupa has this journalism area. We have the fact-checking, the debunking, we verify, we check, but we also have news articles, explainers, news, and we have a media educational area, and also we use media and technology to face disinformation. And I'd like to give the floor to Alessandro Manteleiro. I won't be able to read his mini biography because it's huge, but Alessandro Manteleiro is an associate professor of private law and law and technology at the Polytechnic University of Turin. In 2022, he received the Jean Monnet Chair by the European Union. He is a member of expert groups for the protection of data, and he's an expert for the UNPD on artificial intelligence. I'm going to stop now. Thank you.
I'm sorry to switch to English, but I'm not able to talk in Portuguese properly, and so I switched to English. I think that the only point that can be useful maybe in the bio is but was not in your bio, is that I was one of the experts that served for the Federal Senate during the discussion on the AI regulation here in Brazil. And what I want to point out this because I think that I don't want to bring the idea that this is the voice of the European Union. I work a lot with the European Union institution, but also with the Council of Europe and the United Nations. So I've tried to have a quite broad perspective. And I think that if there are some similarities, as you mentioned, between some acts that are under discussion here in Brazil and other acts that are under discussion in Europe, it's not because we have to adopt the European model. It's not because the European model is better than other or because we have a sort of European neo-colonial approach. The fact that both Brazil and Europe, when we are discussing about the relationship between citizen and big player in AI, big player in media, we are largely in the same position. So we are a country in which we have not the dominant player of this new digital ecosystem do not come from our country. So this makes more difficult for us to regulate them. And for this reason, we reach to similar conclusions sometimes. So I think this is more a circulation of models of approach rather than the idea that this is the European model and we copy the European model. We don't copy any model. The models circulate because there are common issues. And here the common issue is the imbalance of power between those that want to regulate and the big power that usually are not so happy to be regulated, but have a huge impact on our society. So this is just the first point. The second point is that we have three different kind of actors that should be considered. The first actor are the user. The second actor are the gatekeepers, so the big player. And the third actor are the AI developers. They are not necessarily the same. As for the first, the user, you already mentioned the relevance of literature, the education, and the participation also. The user can provide some help in order to better understand, to contextualize a message, to correct some wrong information, and this is important. At the same time, the user are those that use a lot of fake news, that create a lot of fake news. With AI, it's easier than before for a user to create fake information at a large scale, and this is an issue that we have to face with. The second player is represented by the gatekeepers, mainly the platforms, the big platform. For them, of course, AI and democracy are two faces of the same coin to some extent, in the sense that they use AI in order to mitigate the risk, but also the using of the AI in the system can, in a paradox, also increase the risk. So AI, for instance, is used by gatekeepers in order to moderate content. Large part of content moderation is based on, nowadays, on AI. But of course, this is not necessarily a positive outcome, because when we talk about AI, we have to always to keep in mind that the AI is based on something that we use to train AI. And so if you use content moderation based on AI, AI will judge the content based on the experience, and the experience is based on the data that you put. And so Facebook decided that a naked statue, because the statue sometimes are naked, in Italy is considered as an infringement of their policy because it's a naked body. And so this is an example, but this is the problem. The training data set in many cases is not consistent with the local context, with the local culture. And this is something that is very important. We have to ask not simply moderation, but we ask for a contextual moderation. In Brazil, in Europe, in several countries in Europe, we have different kind of range of values. And this value, the difference of this value should be taken into account when we consider the moderation. And in this sense, it's very important also to consider the anthropological dimension of the act, because in many cases when we are online, there are some behavior that in one society have a specific meaning, in another society have another meaning. And sometimes the AI is not able to understand. But it's not only the AI that is unable to understand, because big corporations emphasize the AI as a sort of genius that solved the problem. But behind the AI, there are people in India that receive a very, very small amount of money to label images. But if an Indian people label an image that comes from Europe or from Brazil, may have not the same knowledge of the context of the anthropological situation. And if you add that, usually the labeling is looking at the first 10 seconds of the video and decide what is the argument, you understand that this increases the risk of an AI to moderate content that is biased. And this is an issue that we have to deal with the big companies. They want to make their business, but their business should be done properly, take into account the context. And the context is different. It's different in Brazil, it's different in Europe, it's different in US. There is not a global context. The globalization of the context, the globalization of the value is something that is an issue that we have to discuss. Being a global player doesn't mean that they have to make a uniformization, a uniform approach to all the situation. The third point is the AI developer, those that create AI. If you look at big companies, Microsoft, OpenAI, etc., they say, oh, well, we provide open access instrument. I was in Sao Paulo a few days ago. There was a representative from Microsoft. They say, our systems are open, and the openness, of course, is a guarantee. Of course, openness is important, but openness is not enough. The fact that a system is open doesn't mean that it's completely transparent. It doesn't mean that the training can be changed. It doesn't mean that there are not bias in the way in which the training has been done and the value that are put in the system. So the openness is important, but it's not enough. We need more than openness. We need risk assessment. We need transparency. We need accountability. Accountability, it means that you should demonstrate what we have done. Not simply say, I'm open, I have my self-assessment code, and something like that. No, you have to demonstrate. And in this sense, it is important to switch to the second point. The second point is represented how to face this kind of challenges. A key point is represented by the risk-based approach. In the Brazilian proposal, both the proposal, the very recent proposal, and the proposal that was presented some months ago in the Senate, we have in both the risk-based approach. That is phrased in a different way, but what is important is that we have this risk-based approach. And the risk-based approach is the same that is also important for the content analysis and moderation in the online system. In this sense, it's very important to consider the impact on fundamental rights. Of course, the impact of fundamental rights for online platform, for online service, is about the service. It's not about the single message, but it's about the design, the way in which you create this system. But to make this to impact assessment, it's very important to have some specific parameters. I think a very positive aspect of the Brazilian AI proposal, that in this point is much better than the EU proposal, is the clear point about the parameters that should be considered in order to assess the risk. Unfortunately, in Europe, there is a bit of discussion / confusion about this parameter, that there are too many parameters that are not well coordinated. In the proposal in the Senate, the second, there is a clear definition of the parameters. As well as in the third, more recent proposal, although with an annex that is a bit complicated, but the idea to have a matrix is something that is useful. And then the matrix could be much better, but this is a matter of technicalities, we can work on that. And so the parameters are a key element to carry out a proper risk assessment, because without a proper risk assessment, we cannot understand which is the impact. To give an example, there are some important social networks that are based on the idea that fake news are good because they increase the people that are engaged, and they increase the time the people spend on the social network. This is clear against any kind of fundamental rights impact assessment that is focused on democracy, focused on fundamental rights. And so if your system is designed this way, this system cannot be consistent with the idea of protecting fundamental rights. And an impact assessment can figure out this kind of limits and ask you to change the design, have a different kind of design for the platform. This is a key point, the risk assessment. And of course, the assessment is not only about, because this is another tricky point in many regulations, the assessment is not about only the product, but the product in the context. So when you say that you want to have a system of content moderation, you have to consider also in which society you use that system of content moderation. Because it's not only the technicalities of the platform that to be considered, but also where the platform is used. For instance, if in a country the level of digital literature is low, of course you have to compensate to some extent this weakness of the society. You cannot imagine to have the same level of maturity that they have in other countries. So the context is very important. Second element, still the risk assessment is important, but also for the specific content. This is another way in order to use the risk assessment. So what it means? It means that we have to consider what is the specific content that can be of risk. So the content that should be removed, for instance. For this goal, we often use tools that are based on AI. But of course, there are issues in terms of their effectiveness. First point is represented, as I mentioned, by the low-paid people that can make mistake in labeling the information. The second point for Brazil, but also for Italy, more for Italy than from Brazil, is the linguistic approach. Because all the system or the large language model are perform better because are trained better on English text. And sometimes in order to manage other language, pass through English. That is not so good in terms of better understanding. It's very complicated when you have to understand the content that are comments in a social network. That can be slang, can be local, etc., etc. So this is another important issue as regards the risk of the specific information that you can find, how to assess them. Another important point is that we always mention in this regard the role of human supervision. The human on the loop. If you talk with all the big companies, they say, oh, but at the end there is the human supervision. We have to contextualize what is this human supervision. Because if you look at 10 seconds of a video are not exactly human supervisor. If there is an AI that say that some contents should be removed based on some analysis, maybe the human supervisor are not interested to say, oh no, I think a different way. So the humans are not always, usually are risk adverse. If the machines say, take down, they take down. That's the game. So sometimes the idea to have a human in the loop is not enough in order to have an effective, independent overview. Other 2 points before the conclusion. The first one that we discuss about impact on fundamental rights. There is a proposal in the Council of Europe that include also the impact on democracy. I think this is a very crucial point because the impact of democracy in terms of risk assessment theory is not possible to carry out. Because the impact of democracy means that you have a parameter to define what is democracy. We have not a parameter to define what is democracy. While for fundamental rights, we have a jurisprudence, we have cases, so we can say what it means to some extent, freedom of expression, etc. For democracy, there are many nuances of democracy. So in this point, it's important to see democracy through the lens of human rights. So it means, for me, there is an issue in democracy if a platform does not respect the freedom of expression. If a platform disseminates content that creates discrimination. So it's not a democracy per se, but are all the fundamental rights that create a democratic context that should be safeguarded. This is much easier than assess an hypothetical impact on democracy, because it's very difficult to say what is an impact on democracy or some technology. It's very difficult to say. And the last point, we have to combine the regulation based on hard law, like in the AI proposal in Brazil, with also soft law instruments. But together, what in Europe, it's not Europe, it's come from France, is the idea of co-regulation. Co-regulation, it means self-regulation combined with hard law. Not pure self-regulation. Nice code by big companies, then not necessarily in compliance with their practice. But we fix some principle, we fix some rules, and then we give flexibility through some self-regulation instrument, like codes of conduct, that can be better developed sometimes by the company. For instance, in Europe, we have a code of conduct with regard to the content moderation, and is about, for instance, the transparency of political advertising, the fact that you can penalize those that disseminate fake news in order to reduce any financial incentives to them, or the idea to create some tools like a flag in order to monitor some content, or create some cooperation with NGO in order to provide additional information to complete the information, etc. So all these tools are technicalities that should not be necessary in the law, but could be better in a soft law instrument like a code of conduct, but under the condition that this code of conduct is part of the law. So if there's a violation of the code, there is a violation of the law. So there are not black and white, hard law, self-regulation. There is a way in the middle that is hard law that fixes some rules, and the flexibility in self-regulation, but self-regulation that became part of hard law. So if there is an infringement, there is a sanction. I think this is a way that can combine the different instruments and create something that is more flexible, considering the evolving scenario of the AI, including with regard to democracy and information. Thank you.
Bom, muito obrigada.
Thank you very much to all of our panelists. I received the information that we can go over a few minutes and go until 4 p.m. If you have any objections about this, please let me know. And if someone from the organization is not in agreement with that, please let me know. But this is the information that I got through text. I had a question to each one of our panelists, but I'm going to attach to the topics of the panel, which is risks to the new technologies for the contemporary democracy. I had a few questions from the audience as well, but I'm going to ask you a question that has to do with the topic of the panel, which is due to the digital transformations, how the experts and the public administrators can think about strategies to face disinformation in short and long term. This is a very comprehensive question, and I would like all of you to answer from your standpoint. And because I said that in the beginning, we were going to advance a little bit in the creation of practical solutions. So I would like you to debate on these topics, and I would like us to debate on how we can create practical measures to try to minimize these risks to the contemporary democracy. So I will leave it open for those who would like to start. Actually, my speech already brought a series of actions that, starting from a perspective that the government is just an actor in the middle of shared responsibilities. We have a set of private actors and universities and schools that have participation in this. I would like to highlight, I would actually like to add 2 points to my answer. AI sometimes mistakes correlation with causality and assumes causality when there's only correlation. And this may generate bias. We need to understand when those biases are generating negative impacts or being used for prediction. I'm going to give you an example that is in the original proposal of the text in the Senate. That for me is a problem. The idea that you can, to some extent, identify by someone's past the possibility that they can be a repeating offender. I think this affects fundamental civil right. The fact that I committed the crime in the past cannot be used against me as an element that says that I'm more likely to become a repeating offender. It does not mean that I have the probability of committing more crimes in the future. So it can be used to search for criminals that escaped, for example. That is the correct application. So we have to discuss the applications of AI and the impacts in fundamental rights. I think this has to be on the table all the time, and we have to have a public environment for this debate. Would it be in a regulatory body? Would it be in the data protection entity? Would it be in a committee of experts? We have to discuss where this discussion should take place. I didn't approach it here, but President Lula said that since the beginning of the year that this is an international topic. And Alessandro said that Brazil is not copying solutions. There is a global debate since we're talking about the same tools working and impacting in our societies. So Brazil has worked on a global space. Brazil right now is the president of G20 for a year. This topic of artificial intelligence and integrity of information are in the group of digital economy. And we understand that most of the paths and solutions need to be discussed internationally. Today, President Lula and the Chancellor Scholz, they announced the signature of a joint declaration of intentions for a joint work between Brazil and Germany in facing this information. Brazil adhered in August to the Partnership Information and Democracy that gathers India, South Africa, and other 50 countries led by France. Brazil also signed the declaration, also signed by Canada, Netherlands, and other 28 countries, saying that artificial intelligence is a key technology. We are discussing this in the Mercosur and OECD, in the UNESCO spaces, and following the process of the UN of the Code of Conduct on the digital platforms to protect the integrity of information, and in the Global Digital Compact, which is the big action of integrity.
Why am I listing all of that? Because if Brazil is not articulated in this dialogue to try and find the concrete responses in the international environments where it's being discussed, we're going to be out of these conceptual definitions that are being written in the international environment. So this pathway of concrete solutions is always encompassing the international forums. So I graduated in communication and then started studying political science, and I could say that in none of these fields we have a normative parameter well defined on how we want to organize the informational environment. I think that we have a Habermas's reading that is not enough for us to discuss right now. We take it as a normative parameter, but we are not able to transform it in a practical application. Political silence sometimes is using Californian abstract concepts that is privileging the freedom of expression, but forgetting about the collective dimensions. And we lack international universal parameters of what we want. We outsourced this issue to companies, saying maximize the engagement with attention time and actions concerning content with posts, sharing, likes, and so on.
E achar que
It didn't
isso
work. Not only didn't we have sound parameters, but the ones we had, we waived and put in the hands of the programmers. The company's shareholders are doing that, and it won't work, to be clear. So we have to think about a way that could provide concrete solutions, not being afraid of AI, not feeling that you must block it. You must advance, but protecting rights. And we have the ability to do so. We have to understand the legal values that we want to protect to have the right answers.
Vou me desprender totalmente da fala do João. Eu vou começar pela parte do.
I'm going to start with the crime issue. I also have giant concerns about that. But at the same time, I believe that, unfortunately, we want to get to this optimal model, and we are behind because we are discussing too much. If we cannot come to results quickly, as Minister Salomon said, the Justice Salomon said, this role is of the National Congress and only will be of the Supreme Court if the Congress is not able to do that. And if we don't have a regulation very quickly by the Congress, we will need minimal regulations by the executive power, the executive branch. Because we are discussing disinformation and democracy, but democracy has other ways to be impacted. The last year, the greatest superior court in Brazil, the Superior Court of Justice, was attacked, and there was a lot of artificial intelligence in this attack. It was off for several years, and it with a lot of loss for the Brazilian institution. And also DataSUS, that was the health care system, public system, was attacked for 18 hours. We were able to arrest the hacker, the responsible in Brazil, the American one, the one from the United Kingdom, the Russian one, the Poland one. They are not under our bridge, and the Brazilian democracy was attacked. DataSUS was off air when we were ending this pandemic. So we have to use artificial intelligence for good purposes to fight against the bad purpose. If we don't regulate this use, even if in punctual issues, we are going to be vulnerable. Not to escape from the question, and trying to talk about possible solutions, I'm going to talk about intelligence. That is my field, state intelligence. We're talking about strategic intelligence. Many times people don't understand because we only think about criminal issues, but a being thinks about strategic intelligence. And since it's a closed body, people don't know what we do. But it's very good that in the current government, when President Lula decided to take a being from the institutional uh, office and put under the chief of staff, he wanted this intelligence to put Brazil in its proper place in terms of intelligence. And what did we do? While we don't have a regulation, we have to establish parameters from the Constitution and a law from 1999 that created the Brazilian system of intelligence and a being itself. So what is the role of intelligence? To defend the state sovereignty, the democratic rule of law, the freedoms and fundamental rights. That's why we have to use intelligence and artificial intelligence as well. So what did we do? What we call our intelligence production agenda is based in the policies, on the public policies of the state. So we have a knowledge production that can use artificial intelligence in large scale from this big data that could be ours or our national one with the Brazilian intelligence system to take care of natural disasters, climate change, food safety. That is very important with the wars that we are experiencing, criminal issues, but not in the tactic and operating perspective, because this is the role of the Ministry of Justice, and they do that very well. But with the strategic aspect, what is it that the criminal rings can do against Brazil? Not only the Brazilian ones, but the international ones that use artificial intelligence. So we are working with that. For instance, in Brazil, we developed things that a few people know about, that is state cryptography. For instance, if we have to protect our systems, how many bodies in Brazil are using the state cryptography that our research center is providing? Only a few. But only a few people know that the cryptography that is guaranteeing the safety of the ballot boxes that are it's provided by a being. And in partnership with Brazilian bodies such as CERPRO and federal universities, we are going to create this safe communication system. We shouldn't be vulnerable for people who are using intelligence against Brazil, artificial intelligence against Brazil. So our industrial secrets are many times exposed in emails that are very badly protected, and that will create data collection, especially on deep web, and that could be used against Brazil, and it is used against Brazil. And all these attacks against the government bodies, it's because we are not using the right tools, and we should use predictive tools. I will give you a classic example. I was able to work in the Secretariat of Safety from the Federal District, and we had this precise diagnosis using technology of what it means to have violence against women. And I'm giving just an example on how we can use a situation, a case study, to use intelligence and artificial intelligence in other aspects, including the criminal one. And it's a social issue that has to do with democracy. After this detailed study of precise diagnosis that we are doing everything wrong, the state policy concerning the protection of women, it was poorly directed because we didn't know from where the violence against women came. After a lot of studies, BIs, and data collected in the judiciary and the police stations, and also the hotline had 3 times more data than the police records. So we discovered that the problem of the violence against women is that there is this ownership feeling, and we always combat violence, and we don't use artificial intelligence in a reactive way. We believe that we are doing prevention when we prevent the second case to happen. The first one has happened. So we coined a term that we call primary prevention. And the primary prevention, I'm going to repeat here, it's with education, educating boys and girls that women are not a belonging, and also educating girls, you're not a belonging of anyone. So this is the first learning. We must teach that. So we had this wonderful campaign with Mauricio de Souza, who is a cartoonist, and we had the help of the UNPD in a very good project. And we also discovered that, I don't like to say the sentence, but we must state it clearly. We created a list and we detected the women that were ready to die because despite not being able to predict who is going to commit the next crime, we can predict who is going to be the next victim. So we have to approach the victim and try to provide solutions, and artificial intelligence can be wonderful in this use, because these are social phenomena and must be studied. We talk about crime, but this case is a social phenomenon. We must provide the financial and health issues to protect that woman, and we must identify the future aggressor. So, for instance, there are two solutions for you. 99% of the cases in the federal district, you either is going to be arrested and charged with the most serious crimes, and you're going to be convicted to 30 years, or you're going to kill yourself. These are the two things that happen, because the rate of suicide after the feminicide is huge. So we are studying that, the use of AI for the prevention of social phenomena. We talk about crime because crime is the easier expression to understand, but we can use it for everything. We've detected with our programs that sometimes there are no police issues that are efficient as not as enough as inserting jobs in a region to diminish the number of crimes, including art and beauty. The use of artificial intelligence can be very beneficial for the state and for democracy when we talk about education. So in fact, we have many routes that we can use. And just to wrap up, Nicole was talking about the violent extremism. For instance, at ABIN, and I'm going to bring it to FGV, we brought the manual that we developed. It's not a classified document, but we do not disclose so much because it shows some methods of disclosure. It's a manual designated to public safety authorities. All the secretariats receive it, all the intelligence bodies, and also the bodies from educational secretariat. It's a manual that teaches parents, students, and teachers some expressions on how to detect signs of violent extremism, either ideological or religiously motivated. That was developed with the use of a lot of technology that could be enhanced in case there's a collaborative network that is going to be implemented with Syslink. So besides the 49 bodies we have opened with this new decree, so that all of the states and municipalities can be part of this Brazilian intelligence system. This idea is to have enough data. We collect data on closed cases. We put that in this big database and we study that in a systematic way to detect behaviors and signs on social media that enable us to try to prevent some attempts. Some happened, but I cannot reveal to you, but I can guarantee that many were prevented. So with the partnership of ABIN, with civil police in the states, some were disclosed in the states of Rio Grande do Sul, Paraná, and Santa Catarina, and in partnership with a lab that is fighting this kind of crime with the intelligence of the Minister of Justice. Cybers, it's the name. We have no idea of how many attempts were prevented. And this is working hand in hand. So violent extremism in schools and attacks towards schools, against schools, attacks against democracy. They are not Democrats and they have fixed political ideas. Many times they are from the far right or connected to neo-Nazi groups or fascist groups, and they concern us a lot. And as credible it might seem, they are very misogynists. 100% of the attacks practiced by men, almost 100%, 90% are against women. And there's a connection with that, and we must study that properly. ABIN is studying that in partnership with other partners from the federal government. Alessandro Monteiro wants to say something else, right? Your final remarks so that we can listen to...
just two comments. The first one on information. I think we already mentioned in the presentation some technical aspects and some practical remedies. An element that I didn't mention is the role, also considered that we have at the FGV, the role of the research. The engagement of university and research team in scrutinize how the system works for the big company that provide social media is an important role. Independent audits by a university can help this company in order to recognize some shortcoming or to reflect on something that can be changed. This is an element that we introduce in Europe, but I think that is an important element in general, and not to have only self-evaluation, but having also sort of external auditing through those that have skills in research, because we need also some resources in terms of knowledge, in terms of computational resources, etc., to make this kind of assessment. And the second point, sorry, is about the last comments about the colleague. I think that all the AI tools are very important and can provide, as you mentioned, some important result. At the same time, when we use these AI tools, we have to look what happens in other countries. Because the early adopter sometimes face some important issues. For instance, with regard to crime prevention, unfortunately, we have in Europe, like in US, many cases of biased analysis, biased prediction that impact negatively on some fundamental rights in terms of the protection of fair trial, or the equity of the arms, etc. I had the opportunity to write a report for the Council of Europe on justice and AI. So it's true that these tools provide a lot of help, but should be also very carefully managed, because also predicting that someone can commit a crime where there are a bias in the system and labeling this person and going to the house of this person, making an inspection interview, is a potential infringement of fundamental rights. So it is very useful to look at the system, but not simply copy and paste the model, but look at what was also the wrong part of that model where they have been adopted, because this make possible to better this system and to mitigate the risk that exists also in this kind of predictive tools. Thank you.
Cole.
Bom, me atendo bem à pergunta, assim, de forma bem objetiva.
Well, answering the question very objectively, digital asset that accessed by João, for example, or his son, he can perceive information in there more accurately, and digital native can perceive information better than my grandmother, for example. But I think media and education is paramount. It's through the basis that we can correct this and we can create a society. This generation had to do with some band-aids. We have to patch up the society. We had to deal with a lawless land of new apps and new technologies. Not only in the audios, we had a case of 1 month ago of childhood pornography generated by artificial intelligence. It happened in Rio de Janeiro, and we need to work on people's education. A public company like EBC has a major role, and our traditional channels, like the official government channel, has a key role in informing the citizens, making them start questioning what is in fact real. If in 2018 they believed things like the gay kit, some symbolic cases that we remember, I wish that in 2026 and in 24 they could question much more sophisticated content like deepfakes. I wish that people could start exercising this questioning. And the answer to this is media education and the accountability of the press. For us in the public communication, this is a challenge in building credibility and identifying also where these debates happen so that we can produce the vaccines against disinformation. Sometimes we cannot have so much predictability on what is going to happen, but I wish we can have a better reading of what is their speech so that we can format the vaccine in a way that it's tangible for those who are going to receive that information and they can question what they are receiving. Excellent, Nicole. Thank you very much. Thank you to all of our panelists. I would like to thank also those who sent us questions. Unfortunately, we cannot read all of them, but I think almost all of them were approached somehow, some of them more deeply, others more superficially, but I think all of them were approached. Thank you very much for listening. We're going to have a 15-minute break and we come back next. Thank you very much.
Olá, boa tarde.
Hello. Good afternoon. I would like to give special greetings to those who are following us remotely, especially those who are with us in person in such a beautiful space, the Cultural Center of FGV. We are here talking about artificial intelligence, disinformation, and democracy in this debate promoted by the School of Media, Communication, and Information of the Getulio Vargas Foundation, FGV Law Rio, FGV Knowledge, Lupa Agency, and DRI, which are partners in this event. Our topic is about artificial intelligence, human rights, and gaps and potentials. My name is Sandra Bittencourt. I am the coordinator of the Council Media and Democracy and executive director of the Institute Novos Paradigmas. I'm going to invite to the stage Bianca Creme, research coordinator of IDP, Yasmin Kurzi, professor of FGV Law Rio, Felipe Medon, professor of civil law of FGV Law Rio, Beatriz Saab, researcher of Democracy Reporting International, DRI. You brought your own supporters. We could see that the audience has been changing. We have a lot of students. Congratulations for being here. Aren't you on vacation? No, not yet? Great. I'm going to give you a few warnings. I'm going to tell you how this is going to work. Each one of our speakers is going to have an initial speech of 15 minutes, and then we're going to have a few questions to thrive the debate. You are also invited to send your questions with the cards that we're going to circulate around the auditorium. And we're going to read the questions as they come to us. Let's see if we can contemplate all the questions that come up. This panel concentrates around the complex relationship between artificial intelligence and human rights, trying to analyze the potential problematic uses and the best practices related to the application of artificial intelligence. In this sense, the discussion will approach topics like algorithmic racism, the use of artificial intelligence in public security, and the accentuation of inequalities through the use of new technologies. Allow me to do an exercise. Let's ask artificial intelligence to open up the topic of this panel. What would the artificial intelligence tell me? And I did this exercise. I would like to share it with you, and we can move forward to the speeches. I just included the topic, a panel about artificial intelligence and human rights. Let's see what artificial intelligence told me. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our chat on artificial intelligence and human rights. Today, we're going to tell you how technology can be incredible, but also has to respect what is ethical and fair. The second paragraph, I think the artificial intelligence is right about what we will discuss here about it and human rights. It says, we live in a world where artificial intelligence is changing everything, optimizing processes, improving services, and boosting scientific discoveries. But at the same time, we have serious concerns on privacy, algorithmic discrimination, and the potential impact on employment. Preserving our human rights in this scenario is a huge task that goes from guaranteeing transparency and algorithmic decisions to distributing the benefits of artificial intelligence in a just manner. This is the small text that artificial intelligence suggested me for the opening of this conversation. So before moving on to the conversation, I have to give you a warning. The manifestations of the members of the Getulio Vargas Foundation and guests of our events and online broadcasts represent exclusively the opinions of their authors and not necessarily the institutional position of FGV. We reiterate as well that everybody here agreed upon spontaneously participating in this event, and with that, they authorized the use of their image for this broadcast that will be made available afterwards on the official FGV channels. I would also like to say that we are wrapping up this first day of event with this panel that is mostly female. I would like to pass the floor to Bianca Kremer, the research coordinator of IDP. We're going to have between 10 and 15 minutes.
Olá, boa
Hello.
tarde a todas.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much to FGV for the invitation to take part in this roundtable. Thank you very much for your introduction, Sandra. It was a pleasure to have this interesting introduction to the topic. And artificial intelligence has been the order of the day. No moment before data privacy and the use of artificial intelligence was so discussed as a technology that is part of our daily life. And not only part of our daily life in the sense of use, but also in the sense of being absolutely crossed by the effects of third-party use of this technology. So I would like to talk about this today, about my research agenda and also the works that I have done in the topic of artificial intelligence and rights. So I'm going to talk about a very important starting point. I talk from the standpoint of rights. I'm not a developer, I'm not a computer scientist, and the relevance that we have in talking about artificial intelligence should take into consideration all technical teams that produce and study the intelligence in a more applied manner. It's not that rights is not an applied social science, but I do not develop the technology. I understand technically the limitations of this technology for what we're going to talk about it today, the algorithmic biases. I work on this topic for the last 10 years from the standpoint of regulation. And also, I'm going to mention what Abdias Nascimento told us. I am part of the investigated subject. He talks about the Black genocide in Brazil. I am a Black woman with light brown skin. I have straight hair, and as a Black woman, I feel crossed by the phenomenon of algorithmic racism in several aspects. So in the last 10 years, I have worked as an activist, researcher, and professor in the mitigation of racial biases in technology and in law. So I try to understand that law is, as technology, a powerful tool of social emancipation. In spite of, depending on the way that we build the legal narratives, they will reverberate interests of local elites in Brazil and in the world as a whole. This is the culture of legality that was developed here, the same culture that we use to regulate artificial intelligence in Brazil. After this brief introduction, starting from where I come from, where I work, I am a professor that is committed to social movements. I am an activist for digital rights in Brazil. I think it's interesting to think that when we talk about risks and discriminatory biases, Brazil is marked by issues related to raciality, ethnicity, We use in the race criteria the differentiation of access to opportunities, use of products and services, acquisitions, social ascension, and enjoyment of exercise of rights, and legal assets that are guaranteed in several different scenarios. So when we talk about the construction of a hierarchy of humankinds and humanities in Brazil happens through the racial element, we have to take into consideration two things. Technologies have always been used since the whole trajectory of colonialism in Brazil as a power imposition tools. Since all of our construction of Brazil as a colony and also Brazil as a nation state, all technologies and different technologies were used to subdue bodies, experiences, in detriment of others. An example that we have that is more highlighted is the phenomenon of slavery. We are still suffering from this phenomenon, and we reverberate its aspects until today. This is the first point. The second point is the way that we inherit the concept of new technologies, especially in Brazil as a country of the global south, but looking at the Brazilian snapshot, we have to take into consideration that we are a country that is in an international dynamics where we don't produce this technology in an emancipatory manner. We use this type of technology coming especially from the global north, and we use it in a political and a critical manner. A critical as a denial of the criticism. There is a political project of absorption of everything that is produced abroad, treating us as a consumption market and a spring to boost the international companies. So we are a deindustrialized country. We are a country that was formed as a nation state through a sophisticated technology, which is racism. And in this sense, when we use the new technologies, or what is called a new technology, we are used technologies produced outside our terms, outside our experiences, not taking into consideration our own needs in the use of these technologies, either for production or utilization. Having said that, I would like to talk about the algorithmic racism. I intend to speak in 10 minutes, so I have 3 minutes to talk to you. I think 3 minutes is enough. To speak about algorithmic racism, something I would like to mention is not a concept that is worked on literature traditionally, but recently I just published a book last week in partnership with Canoptico, an observatory from SESEC. It was a module of the compilation that they have developed, bringing an understanding of what are certain concepts. The first chapter was about body cameras, the second one was about surveillance technologies, and the third one was mine about algorithmic racism. Professor Assísio Silva has a book about this, and in this collection, I bring in a summary building in a different kind of theory, the understanding that in Brazil, Professor Silvio Almeida brings 3 interesting concepts for us to understand how algorithm racism happens. And it's very nice for us to understand how it manifests in Brazil and what is the role of rights there is a difference between prejudice, discrimination, and racism. This is paramount for us to understand how algorithm discrimination or algorithm racism happens in society. First, we have the issue of prejudice, which has to do with a value, a judgment that will make the person has pre-understandings that certain subject or certain groups of subjects can or cannot perform such activities. They are capable or incapable, dignified or undignified. This is all in the construct of the idea of an individual. And as that individual is inserted in society, and the family, and the work, and the society. So prejudice is in a person's mind. Discrimination happens when this prejudice is put into action. So when it is actionable, the individual or group of individuals is moved away. There is a stigmatization that certain people are not capable of entering a university, which is a very simple, a common example of racial discrimination. And a social construct that the people who join a university through the quota system are less capable. And public universities or private universities, they cannot finish their university degrees. A third point would be racism. Racism happens not only through the mental construction of the individual put into action like discrimination, it is a complete stigmatization of an incapacity that certain whole social groups had opportunities of all kinds. This is a very strict summary. Professor Silvio Almeida brings this in a very small book called Structural Racism. And he brings this differentiation for us to understand what is the role of race in the understanding of what is right, politics, society. And in terms of algorithmic racism, I will bring to my conclusions the fact that there is no neutral technological development. There is no technological development without a political interest. All technological developments, they are under the economic, political, social, and legal logics, having in the law a condition of possibility for the implementation of a series of effects, aiming at profit, aiming at social modification, whichever the objective. Now, the main economic intangible asset an internationally competitive asset as a tool for social emancipation and as a tool for internal economic development is artificial intelligence and technologies in general. So artificial intelligence is not only a commodity, it is an economic asset, one of the most relevant ones that we have to make a nation emancipated, competitive, and to have a nation have substantial economic growth. And when we are positioned in the international context, considered Latin America, because they never call us Latin American. That was another racial intersection that was directed towards us. When we live in a country that built as a condition to establish as a nation state a whole logic of racial hierarchies, without mentioning other categories like race, gender, class, disability. And when we see ourselves in the international scenario as competitive, apart from truly competitive means for the production of this technology that is now in the center of some of the biggest international economic desirabilities, this places us in the margin. it is impossible for us to compete, and it brings us some nefarious effects of technologies that were not designed by us or built by us to adhere to our multiple ways of being and well living. So the challenges that we face here in ethnico-racial studies in Brazil have to do with the way that we use the technologies produced abroad and also how we will be able to produce this technology competitively in large scale. And it has to do with the algorithmic racism. It does not only have to do with the discrimination of one way of application of a system.
It concerns the political form as we make choices so that some technologies can be acquired by the public power, pushed to work in a more expressive way in some regions than the others, more than in others. WhatsApp is in 99% of the Brazilian cell phones, with the second number of users in the entire world except for India. It's not by chance, because here we work with this difficulty of access, with this very expensive technology. So we are based on zero rating. When the data is over, you're going to use the free apps. So the platforms are for free. WhatsApp is for free. That's how you're going to communicate with your family and perform your labor activities. This is a algorithm discrimination. Talking about Black racialities in Brazil, we have the use of face recognition systems in Brazil for public security. More than 90% of people arrested by facial recognitions, they are Black. So I wanted to say that we cannot talk about economic and social development without taking into account the discriminatory processes taking serious. And I'm anxious to listen to from our colleagues. Thank you, FGV, for this opportunity. Thank you, Professor Bianca. You spoke in 15 minutes, but I could listen to her for 2 hours. Bianca, she's a doctor in law from the Catholic University Rio, and she's a digital researcher at IDP. Now we are going to listen to Professor Yasmin Kurzi, professor at FGV Law School, coordinator of this program in inclusion, and she's been working with focus on human rights and technology, regulation of platforms, gender and democracy, digital democracy, and many other things, but we have to summarize the curricula. The floor is yours. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today. I'm going to start my presentation. It's hard to come after Bianca because I could listen from her for 2 hours as well. It's very relevant to listen from her. I'm going to start right away. I am a professor here at FGV. I've taught this semester a discipline on artificial intelligence and human rights. I brought Bianca to give a class with me because you've just seen how wonderful she is, right? In this discipline, we had as main questions raised the attempt of address how the accountability of technology companies can happen, what are the new legislations on the topic, both nationally and internationally, and how the international law has been trying to deal with this debate that João Brandt has presented somehow. Brazil is trying to connect to the best practices on artificial intelligence around the world. So these are the topics that I tried to bring to the discipline, and also the fundamental rights impact assessments, how the future lawyers can try and work to mitigate the damages in the companies. So that was the general objective of the course, always dealing with race, gender, and equity at the digital setting. For today's presentation, I brought to you some main debates concerning human rights violations and AI, but I'm going to focus a little bit, not to waste time, in issues concerning content moderation and the use of AI in digital platforms, both social media and search engines. As Professor Madelera said, artificial intelligence is going to be used in two ways at the social media platforms and search engines. First, remunerating content with pushing, sometimes depending on the profile or not, and also content moderation, ex ante or ex post, ex ante before posting and ex post after this content is circulating. This infograph is very interesting. I recommend the reading of the use of AI in content moderation material, showing how the AI cooperate and aid in content moderation. Concerning the content uh, recommendation, I like the work by Professor Zainab Tofekci. She's been talking about the damage to human rights. Concerning this type of technology, she published this article, Algorithm Harm Beyond Facebook and Google, in 2015, understanding the power of these platforms on content regulation. She's going to talk about the Ferguson debate after the murder of Michael Bond. That was an important topic in 2014, and also the protests of Black Lives Matters. Observing the algorithm feeding that before we had a chronologic, so you should scroll to find a post that you were interested in. But when she observed this new feed, she couldn't find information on the debate on Black Life Matters. Only the ice bucket challenge, that challenge that you turned this cold water over yourself. An important agenda was the awareness of a disease, but her point in this text is the recommendation algorithm was operating using this logic of engagement, understanding that the debate about iced bucket challenge had more potential to engaging the users because it was a challenge. You had to mark 3 people, so the algorithm understood this with a greater engagement potential to the detriment of the the protest with Black Lives Matters. And she was only able to access this debate on Twitter because at that time it had a chronological feed and was more democratic. Concerning gender issues and also concerning the content recommendation, Alice Merwick is a researcher who's been thinking about online harassment, and she recently published this article based on social psychologic authors from Yale, Mally Crockett, and William Brady, how these systems operate from the content engagement with outraging content. So the hate speech, the gender violence, she's showing through empiric evidence how this moral contagion is happening. And women become more vulnerable in this platform, especially due to this moralizing logic. Here in Brazil, there's a study by Monitora that I was able to collaborate with. We collaborated in the glossary that was used in the launch of this observatory. And we observed this great problem concerning the contextual moderation, as Professor uh, Montellero has signaled to us. We see attacks, gender violence, hate speech that are still happening on the platforms with no type of moderation. And being actively recommended by the platform, this kind of content, especially clickbaits, because they generate engagement, they are going to be more feared. Besides, we are going to have an institutional problem concerning how these violences will be treated. The Lola law, the, the name came from Lola Aronovich, one of the greatest feminists in Brazil, that she's reporting misogynist cases, and she's been suffering attacks ever since she launched her blog. Even before the social media was fully used in Brazil, she it was suffering different attacks. In my doctoral thesis, I had interviews with activists and women in politics, and how the logic of these algorithms operate, and how when there's no proper content moderator, how they amplify this kind of violence. And I call it techno silencing in my thesis. These ways as the platforms are employing to amplify the violence. So back to this logic of engagement that is prioritizing content going viral, regardless of its quality, with no commitment with informational plural, pluralism, from this lack of investments. And then we have this logic that Bianca also brought to us concerning how hard it is to understand countries from the global south as democratically relevant, not understanding and not investing in these countries in general. Not only Brazil is suffering with this lack of moderation in Portuguese, but also in the case of Palestine, we saw reports being published as how they have been announcing content promoting the annihilation of Palestine communities. And the same thing happened in Myanmar, according to a report from Amnesty International. So this lack of investments in proper content moderation, it causes two problems. False negatives. I brought some excerpts from the interviews with Lola, especially the lack of removals. Twitter specifically was not removing content because they couldn't understand the content as toxic and problematic. So we had false negatives and also false positives that the platforms are openly against us. They are actively removing contents from activists because they are violating their rules. They understand it like that, even if in fact they are not violating. So we have the freedom of expression being curbed. The chilling effects concept was commented by João in his presentation, and this is a paradigm shift that Professor Marian has been proposing and concerning this concept on the regulation of platforms. Many times, this regulation is made in such a way to prevent the platforms to have more effective actions to curb this movement that could promote a cooling effect on this discourse that is published online. On the other hand, without those incentives to fight hate speeches promoted online, we could have what Mary and Franks call a greenhouse effect that could disincentivize minorities of actively participating on social media and the public debate. I won't be long, so I wanted to show some more things, but I think my intention was to bring one of the main concerns concerning the expression of minorities online and how the algorithms and systems must be well regulated. And I understand, as João understands, that the Brazilian regulation is trying to think about the 3 layers of data, algorithms, and content in an interesting way, and we hope that the legislation can advance in this sense. I'd like to wrap up because this case of Isis Valverde was quite interesting. From the news about this case, women are afraid of posting any type of picture online, and this is this great evidence on how this active production of online content can be concerning. And we should remediate that immediately, because if we don't allow people to have a safe online space, this expression is going to be harmed. We are making these environments hostile to women and minorities in general. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Yasmin. João Brandt also commented on that, how this chaotic environment is harming opinion shaping and expression itself. When we use this liberty flag to prevent the debate on regulation, the opposite happens. Let's listen from Felipe Medon, doctor and master in civil law from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. He's a professor of civil law at FGV Law School. He is a member of the Family Law Institute and also the Commission of Data Privacy from the Brazilian Bar, and he also integrates the committee of jurists in this federal senate that is responsible about the Brazilian law on artificial intelligence. It seems that Rodrigo started when he was 10, because that's a lot. And he's a good professor. We can see because of this wonderful audience. Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for this invitation. It's a great honor to be here in this afternoon, almost night, to learn so much over this day. And being honored to be in this panel with great researchers, women whom I admire a lot, and it's a difficult position to speak after them. I'd like to comment on the topic of AI and human rights, bringing some aspects concerning regulation. And we could start talking about several things. And this artificial intelligence helped me to find this picture. So what are the possible routes to talk about artificial intelligence on human rights? We could talk about equal access to technology, non-discrimination, technological sovereignty, cybersecurity, protection of vulnerable groups, disinformation, hate speech, but I'm going to focus on public safety and autonomous weapons and some aspects concerning regulation. We could start this conversation by bringing some elements of the risk taxonomy for human rights that was recently presented by the UN concerning artificial intelligence and generative artificial intelligence. So the UN shows some possible risks of human rights violations in this context of budding generative AI. We could have risks to freedom in general, privacy, uh, liberty of expression, religion, and so on. But before that, we should take a step back. This is a picture that is very common to us, the inventor of the plane. I had the opportunity to present the same slide in an audience with people from other countries, and it was almost a diplomatic crisis. And ChatGPT says that the Wright brothers invented the plane, but what we know is that Santos Dumont had killed itself because the plane he invented was being used to cause a death in wars. So is the problem in the plane or in the opposite, in the way as we use technology? So I think this is an important topic concerning what we are discussing today. Deep down, artificial intelligence and technology itself is neutral. The problem is in deployment that we give to it.
The problem is not in the computer. The problem is who is behind the computer. The same drone that is used today to deliver medications and supplies during a war is also the drone that brings autonomous weapons that kill people in the same war. So deep down, the problem is not in the technology, it's in the application. And this reflects on the way that we regulate this technology. If we have a regulation focused on the technology abstractly and not focusing on its concrete uses, we're going to limit innovation. So we talk about the dual use technologies. The idea behind it is having a product that can be used for a positive function and at the same time a negative function. If you are interested in this topic, watch this documentary called Unknown Killer Robots that is in Netflix. It's about Sean Akins, a British professor who lives in the United States. He works at a pharmaceutical company. He was developing compounds for medications using artificial intelligence, and he was invited to a conference. In this conference, they asked, could you talk to us about how to use this technology to generate drugs that kill people? And he thought that he could write an essay using a binary code. He altered from 0 to 1 the programming, and he was surprised to think that he created millions of molecules that were capable of killing all of us. At the same time that he made this, artificial intelligence is being used to revolutionize drug discovery, drugs that can control and cure many diseases. So the problem is not in technology, but in the way that we use it. We can see this in the deep fakes. They were mentioned here in the electoral context, but they can also be used for entertainment. We can see how disinformation is growing, and the United States give us a clue of a concrete challenge that we have in Brazil in the next year with our municipal elections. We have the same use of virtual avatars for campaigns in Korea. In Argentina, as it was mentioned earlier, an artificial intelligence that can create real-time images, as if we had here right now the face of Yasmin being projected on the screen and changing my voice to Yasmin's voice. This is technically possible. The algorithmic discrimination in the case of the city councilor Renata Souza, there was that Pixar challenge where people generated images, and her image was carrying a gun. The hazard of deepfakes, as Professor Yasmin brought to us, the case of this technology that is more and more available in the hands of people, to the point that children in schools are putting together this kind of montage, generating damage to the image. and to the fundamental rights and human rights of other children and adolescents. We have also this conjugated to politics. Rana Ayub in India had a pornographic deepfake of herself to generate a discredit of this journalist. We also have a problem, which is a problem of credibility itself. What is the truth? I bring you an anecdote that can illustrate this, which is a recent case of Elon Musk, the CEO of Tesla. He developed his autonomous vehicles, and the Tesla's autonomous vehicles generated a few accidents. And a judge intimated Elon Musk to give his testimonial because there were videos when he said that the vehicles were very safe. And Elon Musk said he's not going because possibly these are deepfakes. I did not say this. Of course, the argument was not believable, and he still had to go there and give his testimony. But this brings us one of the greatest hazards of generative AI, especially in this context of deepfakes. We can doubt the truths. We are no longer going to have this critical sense of believing or disbelieving what our eyes are seeing. And in the electoral context, that might be the biggest hazard. We may have a video of someone receiving bribery, and this person may say that that is a deep fake. Today, it's technically difficult to discern what is truth and what is not the truth. But we cannot forget the good side of artificial intelligence. I am a fan of Beatles. I am looking forward to Paul McCartney's concert that is going to happen next week in Rio. We have the song Now and Then that could bring back the voices of John Lennon and separate John Lennon's voice from the piano. And we have the same technology that we are seeing that is being used for bad uses. We have other discussions of the application of AI, but I would like to talk about the use of AI for public security. This is a topic that has claimed our participation increasingly and our need to think about regulation at a state level, but above state level. We have to think about an international agenda to regulate this topic. And this is also a great challenge for Brazil in the temporary presidency of G20. We have seen more and more the use of these tools of artificial intelligence, autonomous artificial intelligence for domestic security in the context that we have in Brazil of a militarized police that carries out public security. This is something that we have to take into consideration. This is a debate that I had with American colleagues. In the United States, they use this AI for military purposes, but here in Brazil, we use it also for local policing. And in the previous presentations, it was mentioned that we have several risks of discrimination involving these technologies, especially in facial recognition. So how can we join this with possible weapons that are capable of identifying a person and making the decision of shooting to kill? Now, several countries are trying to find a middle ground for this because there are some situations that generate controversies. Sometimes waiting for a human being to confirm that situation, that decision may cause danger for the police officers that are in the place, and you may also put in danger civilians that are not part of that conflict. Some elements are weighed, but we have to discuss this topic, not only at a national level, but at an international level as well. As we have seen in the media, the risks for human rights and fundamental rights are incalculable. So within this discussion and moving towards a conclusion in the last 5 minutes, I would like to talk about the regulation of AI in Brazil and the challenges that we have today. Making a brief overview of our current status, we had the presentation in the House of Representatives of the Bill of Law 2120 that was approved. It was approved urgently. We have to be careful not to mistake speed with urgency. So this project was passed in an accelerated manner, and it was a very incipient bill of law. It was a mere rhetoric proclamation of principles. This text arrived in the Senate, and the Senate decided to create this commission of jurists, which I was a part of, and we had participated democratically to present a report with over 900 pages. It's not a perfect work. It is a first proposition that we presented, and in May this year, it became the Bill of Law 2331. Since nothing in Brazil moves swiftly, we ended up having a discussion, and we instituted a new commission made up of 13 senators that are now concluding the final report. And we had already a substitutive bill of law by Senator Marcos Pontes. Bill of Law 2338 brings an approach based on risks and rights. One of the biggest innovations that have been complemented internationally is the prediction of a list of rights. We address the algorithmic racism and discrimination and other types of discriminations that happen in Brazil, and we try to provide mechanisms to fight against this. Mechanisms that have to do with correcting discriminatory biases, rights to contestation, human intervention in certain cases, effective participation. As Professor Montelero said, it's not enough to have someone supervising what Americans call rubber stamping, people that only stamp the algorithmic decision. A person has to have an understanding of the context of that decision and has to act upon that decision. Right to privacy, information, and transparency. On that, we have certain forbidden practices, even though there's no clear prohibition for those autonomous weapons. The Bill of Law 2338 says that when the AI decisions generate irreversible or hard to reverse decisions or involve decisions that may generate risks to life, there will be significant human involvement in the decision-making process and final human determination. So through this Article 11, we cannot have a weapon that shoots to kill without the effective participation of a human being. And we were surprised to see the bill of law, the substitutive bill of law presented by Senator Marcos Pontes, where we have a sounding setback, especially in the chapter about rights. There's no forbidden practice anymore, and there is no need for human intervention as we have predicted in the Bill of Law 2338, which reveals a great setback, as I said. So we are in a scenario where we have to deepen our discussions. We are waiting for the conclusion of the report by Senator Gomes, the rapporteur of this commission, so that we can eventually deepen what we have presented by the Bill of Law 2338, because we know that this is not an unfinished project. It's not a perfect project. It is a starting point. We had some significant advances, and we cannot come back. This Bill of Law presented by Senator Marcos Pontes revives what the worst of what the Bill of Law 2021 had, and it buried the best parts of Bill of Law 2338, which is the protection of rights of the people affected by the artificial intelligence in the context of violation of human rights that we are verifying by these dual use artificial technologies. This is a paper that I published in the last week on Friday, talking about the substitutive Bill of Law. And to conclude, we say that more than ever, we need to cooperate. We have to combine not only domestic regulatory instruments, but international regulatory instruments and mechanisms of soft law. A good example is this last summit that we had, the AI Safety Summit, that happened in the United Kingdom, where we could coordinate not only the production sector, but states on the same discussion table to think about paradigms and minimum criteria for the safe development of artificial intelligence that has effect on all people. And when we talk about a technology that advances very fastly, we have to find this fine-tuning and regulation in order to guarantee rights at the same time that we do not suffocate innovation, so that we can bring predictability for those who are developing technology and have a human-focused technology. This has to be the biggest concern of those who develop and regulate technology focused on the protection of fundamental rights and the human being. Thank you very much for the kind invitation to be here, and I am at your availability for the debate. Thank you.
Obrigada, Professor Felipe.
Thank you, Professor Felipe. I completely understand your students now. Beatriz Sabe is a Master of Public Policies by Hertie School, the National School of Public Policies of Berlin, political campaigns, data analysis, and monitoring of social media. Currently, she is a researcher of democracy, and she contributes to several projects that analyze social media and political events, and also emerging political threats, including violence online. Hello, thank you very much for the invitation. It's difficult to speak after these three amazing professors who are here. I really like what Bianca said in the beginning about giving a standpoint on where I came from and what I'm going to talk about, because I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to talk about it from a legal standpoint. As Sandra said, I am a master in public policies. I have a degree in public policies by FGV São Paulo. It's very nice to be back in an event like this. I would like to thank FGV for the invitation, and I would like to thank Lupa for the months of work in this project. My contribution today is going to be more focused on the technology and how this technology is developed today, how we are studying technology in DRI. I'm going to talk about our studies and our findings. We started studying deepfakes in 2019, and at that moment, we understood that the main targets of deepfakes are the most vulnerable groups, like women, minorities, human rights activists. They are always big targets. There's a study found in our report that shows that 96% of the targets of deepfakes are women. Among what we discussed, defamation, pornography, revenge porn, as they call it. I'm going to bring a concept that I can discuss with you later on, but in DRI, we like to separate what is deepfake and what is synthetic media. We understand that deepfake is content manipulated with the help of artificial intelligence, but these are contents that already exist. When we talk about synthetic media, we mean other formats of media like text, audio, images, and videos that are completely generated by programs and models of artificial intelligence. So we're talking about ChatGPT texts, images made by DALL-E, Stable Diffusion. We make this distinction because it is important for us to understand, and within our perspective, we have to have different ways to detect and identify that kind of media when we're talking about synthetic media. If you have a content that already exists, you can understand where the content came from, and you can find the original video or photo. For the synthetic content, the original photo or video did not exist. It is generated by a program. So this makes us in DRI started looking at the synthetic media, and we increased our approach of not only look at the images and videos, but we also looked at the audios and texts. You mentioned WhatsApp. WhatsApp is limited in Brazil. Actually, there's a study from the New York Times that talks about the pipeline between WhatsApp and YouTube. These are cuts of videos of YouTube that are shared on WhatsApp, and people can watch it here in Brazil unlimited because they are in the WhatsApp platform. Don't leave the platform, and that had great repercussion in the elections of 2018. It's a different access to the kind of content. Last year, we had a great report about the generators of image from the text prompts like DALL-E, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, and we were doing this research in April 2022. We talked to many experts, and they said this technology is not going to be used by all people. You are ahead of time. We're not at the tipping point. This was a great surprise because in December that year, everybody knew how to use ChatGPT.
Com os próprios geradores de imagem.
Everybody was integrated with the technology.
Entrando nas trends de fazer os avatares
and
deles.
everybody was using the trends of making their own avatars. Why am I talking about these programs so much? Because they are in the concept of diversity.
Criativo que eles têm,
In my view, makes their creative potential be questioned. Because if the representatives such as Renata Souza says, I want a black woman from the favela, and you see this character with a gun in her hand, you want to stop using this kind of app. So why am I talking about that? Because I believe the first thing that we should consider when we are talking about generative AI, it's something that we've mentioned. What are the data they were trained with? And how do we see the bias within these products? So I'm talking about gender bias, race bias, and I liked your distinction between prejudice, racism, and discrimination. And if I say something wrong, I'm sorry, but we end up being able to understand that the biases that we see in the outputs that they bring to us, they are due to the data they've trained with. If you put CEO on Google, you're going to see white man pictures, as we know. And there's this very interesting research by Bloomberg, and I saw that you also mentioned that in your slides, but they asked to generate more than 5,000 images, and in the prompt they were using to reproduce the images, they put some job positions, a CEO or a cook or householders, babysitters, and they saw that the prompts where you saw job positions with a greater remuneration, most of them showed white men, and job positions with a smaller salary, for instance, a person who is working for fast food, they were black people or darker people. So this bias that we observe is happening not only in the apps, but also it's not that the user is asking an output, a specific output, but that happens also with public safety, with facial recognition. There are recruiting companies using the scan of the CVs, and then we see that this is a problem as well. And the impact of that within disinformation and online violence, as was commented in the morning, is that this kind of technology makes you have an automation cycle that is huge concerning disinformation and online violence. I'm able to create content in a huge way with no checking, no filter, and there's a response from the platform. They say that they have safeguards, they have filters, But there are two main problems. One is that it's possible to circumvent the safeguards. We investigated with ChatGPT and Bard from Google, and after 5 to 6 attempts, they brought articles concerning uh, com- conspiration theories, how immigrants are in Europe to steal people's job, or how the electronic ballot boxes are increasing the chances of fraud, and that's why the Brazilian government should have printed votes. So it's very easy to circumvent these issues. So we have the platform responses, and also what else? And then, why are we worried? Because it's very easy for this disinformation actor to use this platform because they are open source. We've been discussing this dilemma on if something that is open sourced is good or not. It's good because everyone can use, but we have models such as Kandinsky that generates images, and there's no safeguard. You may put politicians' names and you're going to obtain images. And you cannot do that with some other apps. So it's a very complex scenario. Now you have people creating their own models, actors creating models with no safeguards. How can we incorporate all these companies leading to minimize the impacts? It's something that we've been discussing at DRI, and I'm going to wrap up with our approach on what we do with all that, how we are able to mitigate the risks in the platforms. The first one is that we understand that in order to curb manipulation, you have to understand how this manipulation is happening. We've launched a guide for us to help you to understand what are the models and programs that are helping to detect synthetic media. What can we use, not only with the watermarks and hashings, like a cryptography of the content, but there are people today who are interested in understanding how this media is generated. For instance, we have a model with the heartbeats. When the heart was beating, I have some veins that have a different hue in my skin, and that doesn't happen with synthetic models. So there are creators creating apps to help civil society to identify synthetic content. And when we talk about human rights, there's a lot of impact. We've talked about education. So again, without understanding how manipulation is happening, we are not able to protect ourselves. And also there's a regulation point, as we commented. And today at DRI, we work with the regulation at the European Union, but I wanted to talk about the detection of these contents because we believe that there's a great effort today and a volume of research that is huge, how the platforms are using the technologies, but we must observe how we should defend ourselves and be ready to mitigate the risks of artificial intelligence. Thank you. Excellent, Beatriz Sabe. We need to wrap up until 6 p.m. and we have some questions. So I'm going to use my own algorithm to ask the questions, and I'm going to ask the questions and you're going to answer the ones you prefer. I have a question because it's a current decision. Last week, high authorities on human rights got together in Montevideo, and Mercosur has published a principal letter on artificial intelligence. And we have this focus on Latin America in this question, and they define 17 principles such as equality, non-discrimination, human-centered right to privacy, protection of private data, several points that were explored here. But I'd like to highlight two of them for us to talk about with Professor Felipe as well, and Bianca as well. that is the universal access to the internet, recognized as a fundamental right to citizenship by the Mercosur, because here we have the worst rates of access, eliminating this digital gap, including rural and vulnerable areas, promoting this full participation in the digital economy and the benefits from artificial intelligence. And a different point that I wanted to share with you would be the explainability, transparency, and human understanding. So the AI should be understood by all stakeholders, but it's a letter of principles. So my question would be, if today we have tools, what are the most urgent measures necessary for us to reach something close to these principles? And in the same lines, I also have a question by Professor Marcos Schneider from the Fluminense Federal University, a member of this network on combating disinformation. He says that we are favoring the business of big tech, how to combat the effects without harming their main cause. So how can we be effective? In the same lines, we don't have the name of the person asking, but it is to Professor Felipe, saying that Bianca Kremer brought this data that 95% of the arrests made with the help of AIs were Black defendants. And one of the main causes for prejudice uh, uh, for AI were the bias data that trained the AI. So if AI is using more white people, how could this change happen? That's what we want to answer in 15 minutes. We still have a video to watch and tomorrow's schedule as well. The floor is yours. Well, I'm going to be very brief. I loved the questions and I love to listen from our colleagues. I didn't know the difference between deep fake and synthetic media, so I'm very happy that I was here to learn. And I also learned with Sandra concerning the international debates on the topic. What I could mention about access in principle is that in Brazil, in terms of indicators, we are 33 million Brazilians with no access to the internet. I'm not talking about a quality access. And if we have such demands in this global south, that's because of the difficulties we had in the international movement on how we failed in in the international dispute since the summit of disinformation that happened in 2005, when we started to understand that internet was not only a commodity, but it was a condition to have well-being and in this reality. So if we have such demands, it means that we are taking a stance to internally dispute for this economic development from technological production with game rules that could make sense to us. We forget that in Brazil, we are not all in the urban areas, and we have multiple ways to exist in Brazil. We have Quilombo communities, indigenous communities, riverside peoples, especially in the north of Brazil and the Amazon. So how could we access the internet in these spaces? How can we have access to other legal goods that are important in this system? These are dramatic points to take into account. And although it's a principal letter at the international law setting, I understand that the structuring and designing of these principles have a relevant political power positioning an international bloc that is cohesive within these demands. Concerning transparency, we could have other debates, but I'd like to register that some copyleft alternatives should be necessary for us to rethink aspects concerning transparency and this disruption of these dynamics that the law has been offering to the big companies that is encompassing human rights. But I would need more time to debate, so after the coffee, maybe we can exchange more. Thank you. Professor Felipe. Challenging questions. I will try not to bore you. First, concerning universal access, we have to work with this binomial education and access. It's not enough to talk about digital education if we don't have the precondition, which is access. At the same time, it's not worth to have an access and education that is almost like a functional digital illiteracy. The person is able to turn on the computer, but they are not able to critically analyze what they receive. So we observed that in this research study that was launched some years ago, there's a great percentage that thought that the Facebook was the internet, especially in some age groups. There are people who believe that the social media is the internet. So this educational principle was incorporated, but at UNESCO we work with the principle that is more encompassing, that more than understanding the concepts, but education to develop this critical perspective of people who receive technologies and are active subjects from that. Concerning explainability, this is a great discussion that we have with technical experts. Every time I'm in this roundtable with technical experts, they say, you are willing to project about this explicability regulation, but we are not able to explain the pathways taken by an algorithm. What we call black boxes are now being called opaque boxes, and we do not understand the pathways of this algorithm to get to a result. But the Bill of Law 2338 brought an important concept that seems to be an innovation to me, that is bringing this explainability, although we could discuss the extension of it, but it's a different explainability for vulnerable groups, because we have to work with different ways of understanding for different levels of understanding. So vulnerable groups deserve a different explainability type. I cite the example of my grandfather. He usually used technology. He uses his cell phone, accessing different apps. If I tell him that it's an artificial intelligence creating that content, he won't understand. But if I show him an image of a robot and explain to him that this is not a human being, maybe he will understand. So we should take into account the person who is receiving this education. And we have this discussion on how to implement that and how to design that. Concerning the last question on political polarization, it seems to me that we have an opportunity in Brazil to debate in a calm way. We shouldn't be in a hurry in this topic. It's an urgent topic, but we cannot discuss in a hurry. We must call everyone. The last actors must be part of this discussion. Everyone should be called so that we can think about a legislation that has as a great objective the protection of rights, but also guaranteeing innovation. And this is a discussion that we have concerning this bill of law, because the national policy for artificial intelligence in Brazil, should this policy come from this legislation or from this different instrument? this state policy of developing technology that at the end of the day will be directly related to what we commented here. If we train artificial intelligence locally with local image, we are able to minimize the effects of importing technologies that are not made and taught for our context in the global south. So we need to work with this topic. It seems to me that we have this opportunity to go deeper in this debate, always understanding that we cannot mix urgency with hurry. Thank you, Professor Felipe. Professor Yasmin, Bia, some general comments. This letter of principles is very similar to the principles postulated by OECD in this point. I don't believe this is an advancement concerning the principles that should rule AI. But we've been advancing in the Inter-American system with this possibility of this Inter-American Convention for the Protection of Data and Defense of Rights facing ADM systems, automatized decision-making systems. If we're able to work in this international forum, we could adequate it to the domestic setting because the Inter-American system, they foresee internal regulations for promoting rights. So it's something in this sense. In the European system of human rights, the CAI, the Committee of Ministers for AI, has elaborated a draft for this Convention on European Human Rights for AI that has been advancing in this debate, redressing measures so that users and individuals that had their rights violated by such a system can complain internationally, asking for the responsibility of the state if the state didn't create measures to prevent this damage.
Avançar a partir daí. Obviamente, é necessária adequação dos países.
Obviously, we need to adapt the local legislation for this purpose and a series of other mechanisms that the international law and the human rights make inevitable for the rights to be made effective. But it's remarkable that the Mercosur is debating this topic and bringing this forward. But the a convention of the American states can make this even more tangible. I'm going to make a very brief conclusion. As I said, I do not come from law, so I'm going to make a small conclusion on what we see today and how we are working on the side of the platforms in the advocacy that we make. I think with the legislation, there should be not only a nice text, what we call the AI Act, but also how the platform should have those safeguards and these filters in the programs of the artificial intelligence that they have. We work we are part of the Content Authenticity Initiative, an initiative to make sure that the content is authentic. We work with that, and we have a work from DRI. As part of the civil society, there's a work from the civil society to advocate for these platforms to have systems with the legislation. Something that we discuss a lot is also the definition of artificial intelligence, as it was said here before, how you define what is artificial intelligence in order not to prevent innovation. Also, within our work with the providers of this kind of service, it is about understanding how these systems of provenance technology, how this kind of effort can also help us mitigating these risks. So I would like to So I would like to mention that there is an effort from our part and from the part of the civil society in actually pressuring the platforms and the servers of artificial intelligence to have even stronger safeguards, and not only including a flag and saying that this content may not be good. The people sharing fake news are not going to copy the part that says that that content may contain fake information. This is our work on behalf of the platforms. Very well. That was a very rich panel. I would like to thank you for being here. As the Spanish would say, we continue with no rush and no pause. So before we wrap it up, we would like to invite you to watch a video by one of our collaborators for this event, EBC.
A EBC está mudando, comprometida com você, estamos formando uma marca cada vez mais próxima, inclusiva. O novo símbolo dialoga com a nossa linguagem, amigável e acolhedora. O Brasil, no centro do círculo dinâmico, aberto, relevância, abraça nossos. Bem-vindos à nossa EBC.
Muito bem, nosso agradecimento então à EBC parceira.
Very well. Congratulations and thank you to EBC, our partner in this event, and thank you to you who hung on with us. On behalf of FGV, the School of Communication, Media and Information, we would like to thank you all. FGV Knowledge, European Union in Brazil, FGV Law Rio, Lupa Agency, and DRI. Tomorrow we will come back with the panel Metaverse to Innovate in the Production of Digital Knowledge with the support of Meta. Thank you very much and see you tomorrow.